We break down the Chicago Bears offensive line and the new addition of Michael Schofield next on the Unbearable Sports podcast.
Yeah, she's got some nice long
Welcome back to the Unbearable Sports podcast. I'm your host, Brad Barron. Make sure to like and subscribe if you're watching out there on YouTube. You can also find the podcast at Unbearable Sports anywhere that you get your podcast. We're almost to our goal of 1,000 subscribers for the end of the month. Make sure to do that, and if we get that mark, then I will donate $100 of my own money over to the American Diabetes Association. So if you're thinking about subscribing, now is the best time. But guys, this is the week of training camp. I'm so excited for this. I'm actually going to be going a couple days, so make sure to stay tuned for some of the reports. But now there's some news. Right before training camp, we have a signing. Finally, we signed a right guard. I know we were kind of hoping that it would be like Darrell Williams or someone like that, but the Chicago Bears ended up signing Michael Schofield, the right guard, and actually has played pretty much every position besides center, but he's been in the NFL for 7 years, started a good handful of games as well, so a very seasoned player, about 32 years old, or will turn it this year. But really a under-the-radar signing. I don't see a lot of people saying that the Bears were going to sign him or kind of claiming that he was one of the top people out there. But what can I tell you about Michael Schofield? So, 9th highest pass blocking grade according to PFF amongst guards last year. And that's really a lot of the story of this player, is that this guy is a pass blocker. Only allowed 2 sacks last year, which is pretty good at that interior right guard spot. So to me, this guy just comes in. I think that day one is going to be, or maybe not day one of training camp, but halfway through training camp, I think he eventually takes over and competes with Mustipher, but eventually takes it over. Like I said, he's a very reliable pass blocker. And something that I'm going to post out on Twitter, you can follow me at Unbearable Sport, is one thing that I noticed is when he plays right guard, he always graded above a 70, or his season grades were always above a 70, which is a pretty good pass blocking grade for anybody. So to me, he's natural at that right guard position, so keep him there. It seemed like his first year in the league with Denver, they really tried to put him at right tackle, and it just wasn't a good fit for him, so they moved him inside, and that seems to be really his best position out there, is that right guard, even though he did play a little left tackle, left guard. Anytime he would play something besides this, just wasn't too pretty. But I saw a lot of people ask questions. Well, why was he available? Big reason is the run blocking. 47th last year amongst guards from a run blocking perspective, and that's not great. So really, he struggles and has historically struggled in the run game. So that's something that, yes, we're going to have a run-heavy offense. We just have to see kind of, does he really make it that big of a difference? So at least we have some protection from Justin Fields. To me, I like this signing. I would have rather liked Williams, but there wasn't a lot of talent besides him at this right guard spot at this point. And you know what? Good for the Bears for finding this person. I think he's going to be solid. Probably isn't going to turn a lot of heads, which is exactly what you want out of a player. So now we'll kind of preview some of this offensive line, but honestly, I thought it was pretty good. If you're watching out on YouTube, let me know down in the comments what you think about this player. I personally don't mind it at all. I think it's a solid pick, and you're adding some depth. So way to go, Poles. I think that this was a good player pickup. We'll see if we're going to make any other player pickups. Hopefully Will Fuller, but we'll see if they want to try out N'Keal Harry first before adding anybody else. But what do we have today for the show? So we're actually going to continue to go through some of the new additions. This is a player profile, the first one of the offense. Not going to be able to get all these in before training camp, but we're still going to continue through this, previewing all the different positions. Like I said, I will be at training camp. I'll be there Thursday or Friday. I just still have to iron out the details, but I'm excited to post some training camp reviews out there this week. But after we go through some of the new additions, we're going to go and review last year. I'm treating this differently. We're not going to break down every single individual. We're more so going to be breaking down the position group. As the offensive line, you operate as a unit, something that we have not done underneath Matt Nagy. So I really want to break that down as a unit rather than individuals, and then detailed overview of just what's going on this year, and then over and unders like we typically do. And last and not least, did we get better at the position? So let's go through who did we add and who left. And this is what is kind of crazy out here is we really key departures. We only have like 4. Alex Bars, who was a good backup, sad to see him go. Jermaine Ifedi, who didn't play too much, but honestly, when he was in, he wasn't terrible. And James Daniels and Jason Peters. So 2 guys that were arguably our best offensive linemen. We saw them go out the door, or James Daniels take about $10 million to go over to Pittsburgh. And Jason Peters, he actually says that he still wants to play. I think he's about 40 years old, still wants to play, still has high hopes for Justin Fields. I don't necessarily think he should be back. I think that he was really good, but I don't want to test the luck too much with him. But I think it depends on what they look like the first week of training camp. Maybe you need to say, hey, Peters, we need you back in. But it's at least nice to know that he's still looking, and maybe this would be the team. But as we go through the additions, we have a lot. So center, Lucas Patrick. Guard, Michael Schofield. Guard, Dakota Dozier, who's now on IR. Tackle, Sean Coleman. And tackle, Julian Davenport. And then our slew of rookies with Braxton Jones at tackle, Zachary Taylor and Jatiri Carter at guard, and Doug Kramer rounding it out at the center position. So we know this is important to Brian Poles. He's known as the offensive line guru. And what this shows is, hey, we don't have backups. I think that this shows a lot about Latavius Simmons, Arlington Hambright, someone that we might have forgotten about. Those backups, he's basically saying, listen, I want my guys in here. I want to develop my offensive line. And he's adding all sorts of people. And I absolutely love it. The heavy draft, the heavy signings. And yeah, you're not taking any big name stabs, but you're still adding a lot of talent, and hopefully you're getting some diamonds in the rough with some of these players. But let's actually look at what we did last year. So I want to bring this up because I want to just analyze last year where we were at and talk a little bit about it as a whole. And why, like I was kind of mentioning, I like to break this down as an overall offensive line. Now, because we always say the offensive line was bad. we were just like, yeah, we have a bad line. That's how it is. But when you look at this line, just think about who we had, because the starting lineup was left tackle Jason Peters, left guard Cody Whitehair, center Sam Mustipher, right guard James Daniels, right tackle Jermaine Ifedi. And when you think about this team, Peters was not that bad. Whitehair had a down year, I felt. Mustipher, I'm not a big fan of. I know that there's a Mustipher hive, if you will, Mustipher collective. I don't know what you guys call yourselves, but big Sam Mustipher fans are out there. I did not like him. And James Daniels was solid, and Jermaine Ifedi, when he was healthy, was solid. So why were we so bad? And because when you look at the stats, we allowed 58 sacks on 9.7% of dropbacks. That was both the worst in the league. So if we just had an average offensive line or a bunch of like okay players, why are we that bad? So that's where I think, optimistically speaking, I think this is where it's good, because I don't think you can put everything on this offensive line. I think that Justin Fields, as a rookie, he was known for holding onto the football. He was. Even in college, he was known for doing that, where he actually had he took about 3 sacks a game. I don't blame him for everything, but there was a handful of sacks that you could blame on Justin Fields for either running into somebody, holding onto the ball too long, running the wrong direction. And PFF actually has it charted that they blame 31 of the sacks are on the blocking. 27 are by the offensive line out of 58. So that means they're crediting Justin Fields and Andy Dalton and Nick Foles for about 31 of those sacks. So impressive number, saying about half of them are the quarterback's fault. But also, there's one guy that we can all kind of blame, and that's Matt Nagy. You know about the offensive scheme. You know about just a lot of people not getting open. You even talk about like an Allen Robinson not really trying out there. And I think that affects what we think about this offensive line. I'm not here to tell you that offensive line was good. I'm just here to say that it wasn't the worst offensive line. I just rewatched the Giants game against the Bears, and that was a terrible offensive line. This was just a meh offensive line, a poor offensive line, not an average offensive line. So really, to me, I think when you look at what happened, you're hoping that Justin Fields can kind of take a step forward, get the ball out a little bit quicker. Because yes, Justin Fields likes to hit shots down the field. That's where it's really interesting to see what does this offense actually look like. You hope that they can get the ball out a little bit quicker than they did last year, which in turn makes this offensive line look a little bit better. Because the next worst in sack percentage was the Bengals at 9%, almost an entire percentage difference than our beloved Chicago Bears. What an average season looks like is about 38 sacks, which is 20 less than what we had last year, and about a 6%. So we're at 58 and 9.7. Hopefully we can get back to that. But a couple other interesting stats about last year a little bit is that Justin Fields was seventh in time to throw, just kind of reinforcing that, hey, he holds on to the ball. It's not the offensive line really kind of blocking incredibly. He just likes to hold on to the ball and look, no matter how you slice it, he holds on to the ball a little bit longer. It's just the way that the stats are equaling out. You go to next gen stats, you go to PFF, that's just what they say. So, but then next, what we're going to go through too is that Fields was also number one under pressure last year at a 42.8% of his dropbacks were under pressure. So just a really difficult time for him under the pass because people were constantly attacking him, constantly blitzing him, and they knew that it would rattle him as well. We aren't going to talk about a lot of his passing stats, even though that we are talking a lot Justin Fields. It's just nice. We want this pass blocking to get better so he can do better. He, I believe, was fourth, according to PFF, in turnover worthy percentage, like in fourth lowest when he was kept clean. So we want to keep him clean. We want to make sure that he can get the ball out. But let's actually look at this year a little bit more to see just kind of how we progressed a little bit better. Like we said, we want to get better at this pass blocking as a whole. So if we go over to this year, I just had to change this right before the show. This offensive line is definitely different. We don't really know who our starting left tackle is. Right now I have Braxton Jones as the starting left tackle. That might literally change tomorrow. That might literally change in a couple days because of training camp starting out. But right now I have Braxton Jones as the starting left tackle with Larry Borom as the starting right tackle. Then we have Cody Whitehair at left guard, Lucas Patrick at center, Michael Schofield at right guard, and Larry Borom, like I said, at that right tackle spot. Now, when I look at this line, it doesn't scare me as much as I thought now that we have Michael Schofield out there. I think that Lucas Patrick is an easy upgrade over Sam Mustipher. I'm hoping that Cody Whitehair can at least take some progression up and just get back to his normal self. So I think that he kind of regresses more towards the mean. So by getting better because of just that, he can't be that bad all the time. So I think he should be better. And you look at Michael Schofield, I think that even though he's not as good as a James Daniels, I think that your interior is going to be solid, just a very okay interior. And to me, you just want at least an average offensive line. You just don't want a bad offensive line. And this is where the big storyline comes in. How good is Braxton Jones going to be? How good is Larry Borom going to be? How good is Tevin Jenkins going to be? Because that's the storyline that really makes us, that's going to be the final piece to say, how good is this offensive line actually going to be. Because to me, Larry Borom is a solid player. I think looking at this team, like I said, Michael Schofield, I think he'll give you average play. But Larry Borom, I think he was a dependable person. I think no matter what he's going to start, whether it is at left tackle or right tackle, is he going to take a jump? That's the bigger question. But the even bigger question than that is Tevin Jenkins and Braxton Jones. I'm nervous about Tevin Jenkins because I know that they split the practices right down the middle, that it was, I believe, 6 practices for Tevin Jenkins and as a starter and 6 as Braxton Jones as a starter. But this gets me a little bit nervous. I know that they wanted to see, you obviously want to see what Braxton Jones has out there. He is a good athlete. So maybe they just want to see a little bit more, a little bit more out of him. But it just makes me nervous knowing that your second round pick in Tevin Jenkins coming off of a back surgery. Also, what always got me nervous about Tevin Jenkins is it seemed like he was almost timid. And when you are someone who is known as a mauler, you don't want to be seen as a little bit timid for someone who is just covering the Bears from his basement. He just looked, you saw him out there against the Packers, and he was committing so many different penalties out there. He was one of the most penalized players last year in his small amount of snaps. He was very, very poor, very timid, very scared. He needs to, hopefully, with some training camp, he can come out of his shell a little bit. It always got me a little bit nervous, too, when his coach, I remember you heard this, how his Oklahoma State coach said, there's a player in here that's going to be in the NFL. And Tevin Jenkins is like, who's that? And was legitimately like, I don't know who that would be. And he's like, no, it's you. And he's like, oh, really? To me, get your confidence up, man. Like, you're a big mauler. Show it. Just show it in. Now when the pads come on, I want you to try to flatten. If Robert Quinn reports, I want you to flatten him right then and there and show, like, I'm meant to be here. You can flatten the rookie Dominique Robinson, all 200-something pounds of him, just to kind of show who you are and what you are capable of. I just really want to see something out of Tevin Jenkins, at least, that we just haven't seen. Otherwise, I don't know what we're going to do. I don't think that Braxton Jones, realistically, I don't think Braxton Jones is going to be the answer at left tackle this year. That's where maybe you look into, honestly, a Jason Peters like we brought up before, because when you start a rookie tackle, it's not going to be great. We saw that a little bit last year, so I'm not going to trust a rookie tackle like a Braxton Jones. It'd be an awesome success story if he was incredible, but you can't really rely on that. But let's just round this out, though, with a couple of the run blocking key points, and then we can get over to just some of the over-unders. So the run blocking, last year and practically every year, we did not average over 4 yards a carry with our primary running back. Under Matt Nagy, we only did that once, and that was 2 years ago when we averaged 4.3 rushing yards. And before that, in the 4 years of Matt Nagy, first year was 3.7 yards a carry, then 3.7 yards a carry after that, then 4.3, and then 3.8 last year. We couldn't run the ball. I know that this is just preaching to the choir. It just was something about Matt Nagy's system. And one of the best things that I heard was from Joe Thomas, future Hall of Famer, not the linebacker that we have on our team. What he talked about was, as an offensive line, pass blocking was really about how good you are. And the big reason for that is because I'm going against one person. I typically, with blitzes and stunts, but majority of the time, you're going against one person. It's mano-y-mano. You just have to beat your guy. So that's what shows who's good. With run blocking, and yet again, this is from Joe Thomas, not me, but I agree with this. When you're run blocking, it's about knowing where your brothers are. It's about knowing where and who everybody's going to block, which comes from repetition. We all know that Matt Nagy always wanted to pass, always wanted his quarterbacks, like it was his quarterbacks, his passing game that he wanted to make better. My guess, they weren't running, he didn't know how to run a running offense or get enough practice reps with there, because the Bears just always seemed discombobulated whenever they would run the football. We all love David Montgomery, and we all know that he's a good running back, But when no one's blocking, nothing is going to happen. So I'm hoping, because with this new scheme and hopefully people that know how to actually run the football, that they're going to practice. And then you can get some people that know where to block. And that also comes with knowing your starting lineup. So hopefully this whole who's going to be the starting tackle isn't just hidden and it's just a constant battle. You want somebody out there so that your ones can really practice with them. That's where I kind of hope they just say, Schofield, you're with the ones. Or after this week, say, Schofield, just play with the ones. And then we know who's actually going to be out there so they can at least get reps and understand how each other blocks, especially in the run game. But also another key point that I want to make about this run blocking that gets me a little bit nervous is that when we run it to our best running spot, so our best side to run was on Jason Peters' side, or when we were running right at James Daniels. When we were running at James Daniels, we averaged 4.5 yards a carry, and when we ran it over to Jason Peters' side, it was 4.4 yards a carry. And when we ran it to the left end, so outside of Jason Peters, I believe it was about 5.5 yards a carry. Other than that, everything was either 4 or less than 4. So we need some people to step up in their blocking game and just create some reliability. And maybe that is going to come with the scheme. We'll see. I hope that the scheme will start to open this up, because to me, it can't get much worse than Matt Nagy's scheme. But the last little point that I want to make too is that if Braxton Jones is actually going to be the starting offensive lineman for us, he did grade at a 92.4 run block grade at the Reese's Senior Bowl. So you're going against top competition and you blocked really well. So I think that's telling for someone like a Braxton Jones, who never really played against elite competition, and when he did, played very well against them. So that brings us to overall, what do I think of this offensive line? So over-unders. I set this where how well did we do last year, and then are we going to get better or are we going to get worse? So last year, we had 58 sacks, or we gave up 58 sacks. To me, this is an easy under. And you hope to God this is under, because when we're number one and we're number one by a good margin, you want to make sure that this is lower. And I think that Justin Fields is going to be able to get the ball out a little bit quicker. You have an offense that they want to kind of mold around what's happening rather than what they want to happen. So I feel like that's going to be lower, easy. Then next is passing time. So it was around 3 seconds last year. So time in the pocket, time to pass is 3 seconds. I think that's going to be under, not because of the offensive line taking a step back, but more so because I think with any of these offenses, I think you need to get the ball out quicker so that it's easier decision-making for Justin Fields, so that he can really show off his accuracy. So to me, I think that's going to be less, because if this offensive line is struggling, hopefully the offensive coordinator can do something about it and just try to make it a little bit quicker. Now, the next is the average rushing yards at 4. Will the starter get more than 4 yards a carry? And I pray to God that this is over, and I'm smashing the over button as much as I can, because this needs to go over. And I feel like we all want that to happen. Very easy one. And last but not least, I totally forgot that this was it. I made these graphics yesterday, and now I'm recording it today. And it was free agents added, which was at 0.5. So I'm going to take the over. And I was actually going to take the over anyways, just because, and I, hindsight's 2020, but I was going to take the over mainly because of Dakota Dozier tore his ACL and is on IR and is going to most likely be out for the entire season. There's a guard that whether he was going to be the starter or whether he was going to be the backup, they signed him for a reason. And with him gone, you needed a Dozier replacement. And so that's why, to me, I would have gone over, because I expected them to at least add one person, or even at tackle. Because now I think that with the right guard spot foreseeably done, rather than us going, all right, is Larry Borum going to play guard? Is Tevin Jenkins going to play guard? Now we can just kind of focus on those tackles and say, who's going to be the starting two for our offensive tackles. Now, it comes the big part. Did we get better on the offensive line? Now, one thing that I haven't really touched too much on is just the depth on this offensive line as well. I do think that we did. I honestly like what we did with the depth. I know it's not an Alex Spars as the backup, but when I look at the backups, I think about centers. Now that you added Michael Schofield, you have Sam Mustipher, who has shown that he could be the center. So I like that. You don't have to rely on a rookie like Doug Kramer to be your backup center like we were literally yesterday. So Sam Mustipher can play right guard. He can play center. I like that as your backup. But then you're still looking at Jatiri Carter and Zachary Thomas. So hopefully one of those rookies can kind of be that backup. Maybe because of this, Doug Kramer could be placed on the practice squad. That might be a realistic option just because you do have Mustipher. And then maybe Carter, Thomas can be that guard spot. I think that Thomas is going to be on the team. Your backups behind that is just Willie Wright and Dieter Iselin. Don't really think that they're going to be fighting for anything anytime soon. But then when we go over to the tackles, Julian Davenport, Sean Coleman are some backups that we signed, some veteran, and then Latavius Simmons and Jean Delance. And honestly, the only ones that I think that could potentially make it on the roster, maybe Julian Davenport. But still, because he was with the Colts, I believe, and was just a backup player. Not a good player, but just a backup player. I think that really what you're looking at here is just a bunch of rookies and Sam Mustipher as your backups. And unless something goes wrong and they're not great, then I could see Julian Davenport potentially making it on to this roster. But as we break down, so to me, the depth I like because I just like the approach that we're taking. But when I look at the starting lineup, I think Jason Peters, so let's just go down the starting lineup. So Jason Peters at your left tackle versus Braxton Jones, or even Larry Borom at your left tackle. I'll be honest here, I think that if Larry Borom plays as well as Jason Peters did, us Bears fans, I know us, we're going to be going, this guy should be a Pro Bowler. Because I don't think Jason Peters was that bad. I think he wasn't great, and I think he struggled out the gate. He allowed 6 sacks last year, but only allowed 17 hurries, which is less than Larry Borom, which is less than Cody Whitehair, which is less than James Daniels. So to me, he was good. He was solid. He even allowed less than, let me just see, Sam Mustipher, basically the entire offensive line. Jason Peters allowed less hurries. He was good. He was solid. So I think left tackle is a downgrade. I think if you look at left guard, I think honestly that should be better, even though it's Cody Whitehair or Cody Whitehair. I think Cody Whitehair in 2022 is going to be better with the new offense, with everybody around him. I do think that he should play at least a little bit better. And then we get to the center, like I mentioned before, Sam Mustipher over to Lucas Patrick. I'm going with Lucas Patrick easy. Just because even though that Lucas Patrick has performed better as a right guard, I think that Lucas Patrick should be better than Sam Mustipher because I'm just not a fan of him. And James Daniels to Michael Schofield, I think it's a downgrade overall, mainly because of Schofield just being kind of a solid player. And I think that James Daniels was a good guard that we had. And last but not least, Jermaine Ifedi, or you could even throw Larry Borom because he played about 50% of the snaps at that right tackle spot. And then going over to Larry Borom, basically. And I think that this year, I do think that this right tackle spot is going to be better. Because you have Larry Borom or you have Tevin Jenkins out there. And I think no matter what, like if you're really just kind of comparing Larry Borom, and is he going to get better? Or is he better than Jermaine Ifedi? I'd say the answer is yes. I think that he's going to take a step forward. And I forgot who it was saying this, but it was a former offensive lineman that said, listen, rookie offensive linemen suck. You don't want them out there. You don't want them playing. So he was out there playing, and he was solid. So to me, I think that I think that we're going to be better at the right tackle position. So that leads me to the last guess. Is this position better? Did this offensive line actually get better? And This is honestly has been one of the most difficult ones to make. I think because of just the overall coaching, the overall scheme, this offensive line will appear better than it was last year. I'm still nervous about this tackle spot, but I think that in the interior, with the upgrade over Sam Mustipher, I think that you're going to see some more solid play on the interior, and then hopefully some of these people can be a little bit better at these tackle spots. But I'm also hoping that if they don't look good, that we'll end up signing someone. But we'll see. Training camp is just a couple days away. I'm so excited for it. Make sure to like and subscribe and find the podcast wherever you get your podcast. Just search for Unbearable Sports. And Unbearable Sports Podcast, we're out.
Yeah, she's got some nice long hair, and you know that she's a bad chick.
Thank you for listening to this Belly Up Sports Podcast Network product. Some said we go belly up, so we made it our name, and we're still here.